On the evening of my 72nd birthday, my son stood up at the dinner table, lifted his wine glass, and poured the whole thing over my head. The red wine ran down my white hair and soaked through my blouse. Then he looked me in the eyes and said, "You have until sunrise to get out of my house. My name is Cecilia Grace Whitmore. I am 72 years old, and I have lived in the house at 4 Birchwood Lane for 39 years. I raised my children there. I buried my husband from that front porch. I planted every flower in that garden with my own hands. And on the night my son tried to throw me out of it, I reached into my pocket, pulled out a small brass key, set it gently on the table in front of him and said, 'Then you have 60 seconds. The room went completely silent. Every single person at that table stopped breathing. My son Raymond, who is 44 years old and has my husband's dark eyes and none of his decency, stared at that key like it might bite him. His wife, Carla, gripped the edge of the table. My daughter-in-law had organized this birthday dinner herself. She called me 3 weeks ago, her voice sweet as sugar water. 'Mom, Cecilia, Raymond and I want to do something really special for your 72nd. Let us host. Let us take care of everything. You just come and enjoy yourself.' I should have said no. My other son, Gerald, was there with his wife, Patricia. My granddaughter, Lily, was sitting next to me when it happened. She is 14 years old and she cried. My sister, Roberta, sat across from me with her husband, Frank. Raymond's business partner, a man named Clark Dunning, sat at the far end of the table. Clark's wife was there too, a quiet woman named Nora who spent most of the evening staring at her plate. My neighbor from across the street, Miss Dorothy Webb, had been invited, because Carla knew how much Miss Dorothy meant to me after Harold passed. There were 16 people in total seated around the long oak table I bought at an estate sale in 1991. Harold and I drove 2 hours to get that table. He said it was too expensive. I said it was built to last. I was right about that, and I was right about a great many other things too, though the people in that room did not yet know it. The dining room smelled of garlic and roasted chicken. Carla had ordered everything from a catering company. The centerpiece was a tall arrangement of pink roses, my favorite flower, which told me she had done at least a little bit of research. Or she had asked Miss Dorothy, who would have told her. There was a banner across the wall that read "Happy Birthday, Mom" in gold letters, and photographs of me had been printed and framed and placed on the sideboard. I should have felt loved. Instead, from the moment I walked through the door, I felt watched. Carla's eyes followed me around the room. She laughed too loudly at everything I said and touched my arm too often. Raymond barely looked at me during cocktail hour. He stood near the fireplace talking to Clark in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. They stopped when I walked over. I remember thinking that evening felt like the moments before a thunderstorm, when the air gets heavy and still and birds stop singing. I have lived long enough to know that feeling. I did not ignore it. The dinner began at 7 o'clock. Carla served wine immediately, a deep red from a bottle I did not recognize. "Very nice," Raymond said, holding his glass up to the light. "Clark, you know your wine." Clark smiled. "Only the best." He glanced at me, then away. A small moment, but I noticed it. The food was excellent. Chicken roasted with lemon and herbs, roasted potatoes, a Caesar salad, fresh bread, and a 3-layer vanilla cake with buttercream frosting waiting on the kitchen counter. For a birthday dinner meant to honor me, it was carefully planned. I ate my salad and I watched and I listened. Gerald tried to keep the conversation light. He asked about Lily's school play and talked about his work at the county planning office. Patricia told a funny story about their dog. Miss Dorothy asked about my rose garden, which had won the Neighborhood Association's award 3 years in a row. I answered everyone, smiled. I was present. I was also preparing, because I knew something none of them knew I knew. I had spent 4 weeks getting ready for this exact evening. Not this dinner specifically. I had not known about the dinner, but I had known something was coming. You learn to feel it. After 43 years of marriage and 72 years of living, you develop a sense for when the people you love are moving against you. The first sign had been 6 months earlier in April, when Raymond called asking questions about the deed to 4 Birchwood Lane. He was casual about it. Just curious, Mom. Dad always talked about putting the house in a trust. Did he ever get around to that? No, I told him. Harold and I discussed it many times but never finalized anything. The house was in both our names. When Harold died, it passed to me outright. Raymond went quiet after that. Too quiet. The second sign was a letter that arrived in August from a law office I had never heard of, addressed to Raymond Whitmore in care of 4 Birchwood Lane, sent to my address by mistake. I did not open it, but I held it up to the light out of habit, the way my mother taught me to, and I could read just enough through the envelope to see the words estate valuation and primary residence. I gave the letter to Raymond when he visited that weekend. His face did a complicated thing when he took it from me. He said it was nothing, just something related to his financial planning. I nodded and smiled and called my attorney the following Monday. His name is William Pratt. He has handled my legal affairs for 22 years. I asked William to do a full review of my property holdings, my accounts, and anything connected to Harold's estate. I also asked him to look into Raymond quietly, without any fuss. William called me back in 2 weeks with information that was not entirely surprising but was still painful to hear. Raymond had been meeting with a real estate developer, a firm called Dunning Properties, run by none other than Clark Dunning, who was sitting at my birthday dinner table eating my catered chicken. Clark's company had submitted a preliminary development proposal to the city for the land at and around 4 Birchwood Lane. My property, the house Harold and I built our life in, was at the center of a development project that would turn this corner of the neighborhood into a commercial strip. Raymond had signed a letter of intent on behalf of our family without my knowledge or consent. He had listed himself as a co-owner of the property. He was not. He had never been. The house was mine entirely and completely, but he was counting on me not knowing what he had done. He was counting on the fact that I was old and soft and grieving and would not check. Raymond had always underestimated me. Even as a boy, he thought that because I was quiet, I was empty. His father was the loud one. Harold was the one who raised his voice at ball games and laughed until the windows shook. I was the one who balanced the checkbook and read every contract before signing and kept copies of every document in a fireproof box in the back of the bedroom closet. Harold used to call me his secret weapon. After the call with William, I did not confront Raymond. I did not call him or write to him or give any sign that I knew what he had been doing. Instead, I met with William twice more, reviewed everything, and made 3 phone calls that would matter very much later. 1 to my bank, 1 to the city planning office, and 1 to a woman named Susan Greer, who is a senior reporter at the regional newspaper, and who had once written a very kind piece about Harold's woodworking when he was still alive. Susan remembered me. She was very interested in what I had to share. But I am getting ahead of myself. The birthday dinner. Back to the birthday dinner. We were between the main course and dessert. Carla had just cleared the plates. Raymond poured more wine, and then he stood up. He tapped his glass with a knife, the way you do when you want everyone to stop talking. The table went quiet. Raymond looked around at everyone with an expression I can only describe as rehearsed sadness. He said, "I want to take a moment tonight to talk about family. And about the future." Gerald set down his napkin. Lily looked at me. I folded my hands in my lap and kept my face very still. Raymond talked for several minutes about how much he loved his father. He talked about Harold's legacy and how important it was to honor that legacy. He talked about family responsibility and the weight of being the eldest son and all the ways he had tried to carry that weight since Harold passed 2 years ago. People around the table nodded along. Clark Dunning nodded especially enthusiastically. Then Raymond's tone shifted. He began to talk about the house. He said the house at 4 Birchwood Lane was too big for one person. He said it was expensive to maintain. He said the property taxes had gone up significantly and that the upkeep was a burden on the whole family. He said these things looking at Gerald and Patricia, as if the burden was something they all shared. Gerald's jaw tightened slightly. This was news to Gerald, who had never been asked to contribute a single dollar to any expense at 4 Birchwood Lane. That was because I had never asked anyone for help. Paid my own taxes. I managed my own maintenance. I had a modest but stable income from the small craft supply business Harold and I built together over 20 years. We had sold the main operation when Harold got sick, but I retained a percentage of the licensing revenue, which came in every quarter without fail. Raymond did not know about the licensing revenue. Or perhaps he knew and hoped I had forgotten it. He had certainly never asked. Then Raymond said the thing he had come to say. He said, "Mom, we've been talking as a family, and we all agree that it might be time to think about transitioning the property." He used that word. Transitioning. Like the house was a patient in a hospital being moved to a different ward. We think a smaller place, something easier to manage, would be better for you. We've even looked at some very nice senior living options. There is a place called Meadow View Estates that has a lovely garden apartment available. Roberta made a sound. Miss Dorothy looked up sharply. Lily reached over and put her hand on my arm. I did not move. Raymond kept going. He explained that the property would need to be sold to cover the costs of relocating me and settling various outstanding matters connected to Harold's estate. He said it in a way that made it sound reasonable, even generous, like he was doing me a favor. Carla nodded along and refilled her own wine glass. Gerald had gone very still. Clark Dunning was staring at the tablecloth. When Raymond finished, the table was quiet for a moment. Then I cleared my throat very gently, and I asked one question. I said, "Raymond, what outstanding matters connected to your father's estate are you referring to?" Raymond blinked. He had not expected me to ask anything. He expected me to cry, or to look confused, or to look to one of my sons for guidance. Instead he said, "Well, there are some legal and financial complications we've been managing on your behalf." I said, "What complications specifically?" He shifted in his chair. He looked at Carla. Carla looked at Clark. Clark looked at his plate. Raymond said, "It's complicated, Mom. This isn't the time to go through every detail." I said, "Then when would be a good time?" He said, "We can discuss it properly after the holidays. We didn't want to upset you on your birthday." Said, "I see." And then I was quiet again. Everyone seemed to relax a little. They thought my question had run out of steam. Had not. Raymond reached into the chair beside him and pulled out a folder. It was a tan folder with a metal clasp, the kind you buy at an office supply store. He opened it and slid a piece of paper across the table toward me. He said, "Mom, we need you to sign this tonight. It's just an authorization. It allows us to begin the process of evaluating the property for transition planning." His word again. Transition. I looked at the paper. I did not pick it up. I did not touch it. But I read it from where I sat, because my eyesight is still very good. And William Pratt had shown me a draft of this exact document 2 weeks earlier, so I would know what it said. It was not just an authorization for an evaluation. It was a consent form that would grant Raymond and Carla legal authority to begin sale proceedings on 4 Birchwood Lane. It was, in plain words, a document that would allow my son to sell my house out from under me while I was still living in it. I looked up from the paper. I looked at Raymond. He was watching me with that patient, careful expression people use when they think they are dealing with someone who cannot fully understand what is in front of them. And then I reached into my own bag, which was hanging on the back of my chair, and I pulled out a folder of my own. Mine was blue. Raymond's eyes flickered to it. "What's that?" he asked. I said, "This is a document from my attorney, William Pratt, which confirms that the deed to 4 Birchwood Lane is held solely and entirely in my name, Cecilia Grace Whitmore, with no joint interest, no liens, and no encumbrances of any kind." I set it on the table. Pulled out a second document. This is a letter from the City Planning Office confirming that no development proposal connected to this property has been officially accepted or approved. It also confirms that the letter of intent signed by Raymond Allen Whitmore was submitted without the knowledge or authorization of the property owner, which constitutes a fraudulent misrepresentation to a city agency. I set it next to the first one. Raymond's face went white. Carla stood up halfway from her chair. Clark Dunning pressed his hands flat on the table. I pulled out a third document. This is a statement from my bank confirming the current balance in my personal accounts and a summary of the quarterly licensing revenue I receive from Whitmore Craft Supplies, which has been coming in without interruption for 11 years. I set it down. Then I folded my hands on the table and I looked at my son. The room was absolutely silent. Raymond said, "Mom." Just my name. No sentence after it. Just the word mom with nothing attached to it. Said Raymond, "I love you. I have loved you since before you took your first breath. I have prayed for you and worried for you and defended you more times than you know. But tonight, on my 72nd birthday, you sat at my table and tried to steal my house. And I need you to understand that I know exactly what you did, and I know exactly what I own, and I know exactly what comes next if you continue down this road." There was a sound from across the table. It was Gerald. He was pressing both hands to his face. Patricia had her arm around him. Lily was crying very quietly next to me. I reached over and held her hand. Roberta was looking at Raymond with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Cold. Absolutely cold. Raymond said, "This isn't what it looks like." I said, "Raymond." I said it the way I used to say it when he was a boy and I caught him in a lie. Short, level, final. He stopped talking. Carla tried then. She said, "Mom Cecilia, we were just trying to look out for you. We were worried. A 72-year-old woman living alone in a big house. It's not safe. You need people around you, support, care." Her voice was soft and reasonable, and she reached her hand across the table toward mine. I did not take it. I said, "Carla, I am in excellent health. My physician confirmed this at my checkup 6 weeks ago. I live alone by choice. I maintain my property, manage my finances, and conduct my affairs without difficulty. I did not ask for your assessment of my safety and I do not require it." Carla withdrew her hand. Raymond tried once more. He said, "Dad would have wanted us to take care of you." And that was the wrong thing to say. Because I knew Harold. I knew Harold better than anyone in that room or on this earth. And Harold would have been furious. Harold used to say, "Cece, you could run a small country and still have time to bake a pie." Harold never once in 43 years treated me like I needed managing. He trusted me with everything. And so I said, "Your father trusted me completely and without reservation. He knew what I was capable of. I suggest you learn the same lesson before this goes any further." Then Raymond did the thing that ended whatever patience I had left. He stood up. He picked up his wine glass. He looked around at the people at the table as if gathering witnesses. And then he looked at me, his own mother, and he poured the entire glass of red wine over my head. I felt it hit my hair and run down past my ear and soak through the collar of my white silk blouse. I heard Lily gasp. I heard Roberta say Raymond's name like a curse. I heard Miss Dorothy make a small, horrified sound. I heard Gerald push back his chair. The wine was cold. It smelled sharp and dark. I sat very still and let it run. Raymond said, "You have until sunrise to get out of my house." His voice shook, but he tried to make it hard. His face was red and his hand was still holding the empty glass. The people around the table were frozen. Some of them looked at Raymond. Some of them looked at me. Carla was looking at the tablecloth. Clark Dunning had turned his chair slightly away, as though by reducing his angle he could reduce his involvement. I sat for a moment in the quiet. I did not wipe the wine from my face. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan, the blue cardigan I had put on that morning without knowing I would need it, and I pulled out a small brass key. I held it up for a moment so everyone at the table could see it clearly. Then I set it down gently in front of Raymond. I said, "Then you have 60 seconds. Raymond stared at the key. He said, "What is that?" I said, "That is the key to the lockbox at First National Bank on Elm Street. Inside that lockbox is the original deed to 4 Birchwood Lane. Also inside is a copy of the development proposal you signed. A transcript of the phone call between you and Clark Dunning from September 14th in which you discussed how to remove me from the property, and letters from 3 attorneys confirming that your actions over the past 6 months constitute attempted fraud, elder financial abuse, and unauthorized use of a property you do not own. I said, the 60 seconds I am giving you is not the time you have to leave. It is the time you have to sit back down, take that unsigned authorization form off my table, and decide whether you would like to handle this privately or whether you would like me to proceed with what William Pratt has already prepared. The choice is yours. Raymond sat down. He sat down like something had been removed from inside him. The glass was still in his hand. He set it down. Carla put her face in her hands. Clark Dunning stood up and said he needed some air and walked toward the front door. Frank, Roberta's husband, stood up too and quietly moved to block the hallway. Just stood there, hands in pockets, very calm. Clark sat back down. Gerald was looking at me with an expression I can only describe as someone seeing something for the first time that had been right in front of them all along. He said, "Mom, how long have you known?" I said, "Long enough." Miss Dorothy, bless her heart, stood up and went to the kitchen and came back with a clean dish towel, which she handed to me without saying a word. I wiped the wine from my face. I smoothed my hair. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the birthday cake that Carla had brought out quietly at some point in the last several minutes. It was very good cake. Vanilla with raspberry filling. Then I looked at Raymond and I said, "Let me tell you what is going to happen now." Raymond was quiet. Carla was quiet. Clark Dunning had the expression of a man who is calculating how quickly he can exit a situation. But I was not ready to let anyone exit. Not yet. I said, 6 months ago you contacted a development firm about selling this property. You did this without my knowledge. You misrepresented yourself as a co-owner of this property in official communications to the city. You coordinated with Clark Dunning to value this property, locate a buyer, and plan a timeline for my removal. You drafted a legal document designed to obtain my consent through deception, and you plan to present it to me this evening. At a birthday dinner. On my 72nd birthday. With my grandchild at the table. Raymond opened his mouth. I held up one finger. I was not finished. In preparing all of this, you made several significant errors. The first error was assuming that because I had never confronted you about any of it, I did not know. The second error was believing that the deed to this house was in any way subject to your authority. The third error was choosing tonight to act, because tonight in this room I have witnesses. I gestured around the table. Every person at this table, including Clark Dunning's wife, who I suspect was not fully informed of everything her husband has been doing, is now a witness to what happened this evening. Raymond said, "Mom, can we please just—" I said, "Raymond." The boy flinched. He actually flinched. He is 44 years old and 6 feet tall, and he flinched at the way I said his name, because some things go very deep, and a mother's voice is one of them. Said, "You will not interrupt me again tonight." He nodded. I turned to Clark Dunning. "Clark," I said, "your development proposal has been rejected by the City Planning Board. I received written confirmation 3 days ago. The rejection cites the unauthorized nature of the property consent documentation. Additionally, a complaint has been filed with the State Licensing Board for real estate development citing misrepresentation in a city permit application. Your attorney will likely be contacting you about that in the next several days." Clark's face had gone a particular shade of gray that reminded me of old concrete. Nora, his wife, was looking at him with an expression I recognized. It is the expression of a woman who has just understood something she had been choosing not to look at directly. Clark said, "I had no idea the authorization was." Said Clark. "Stop. I appreciate you attending my birthday dinner. I do not appreciate what you have been doing with my son. I would suggest that going forward, your business interests and my family stay completely separate." He nodded once. "Good," I said. Roberta said, "Cece, do you want me to call William?" Said, "Not yet. I want to finish my cake first." That made Lily laugh despite everything. A small, short laugh that she covered quickly with her hand. I looked at her. I gave her the smallest smile. She is 14 and she did not deserve to see this, but she was also going to be fine. She is smart and she has her grandfather's stubbornness. She would be absolutely fine. Ate my cake. Everyone else at the table either sat very quietly or picked at whatever was in front of them. Miss Dorothy poured herself more coffee. Frank sat with his arms folded, completely at ease, Watching Raymond the way you watch a pot that might boil. When I finished my cake, I set my fork down and I said, Raymond, I'm going to give you a choice. Because despite everything, you are my son, and I believe in giving people choices. Raymond looked up. His eyes were red. He had been crying quietly, or trying not to, for the last several minutes. Option 1, I said. You and Carla return home tonight. You contact Clark's firm tomorrow and formally withdraw from all discussions and agreements related to 4 Birchwood Lane. You make no further contact with any city agency regarding this property. You speak to William Pratt by the end of next week, and you sign an acknowledgement that you have no ownership interest in this house. In exchange, I will not pursue the fraud complaint formally. Raymond swallowed. Option 2, I said. I instruct William Pratt to file everything he has prepared. The fraud complaint, the elder abuse filing, the misrepresentation report. The city gets copies. The newspaper gets copies. Clark's licensing board gets copies. And everything that happened at this table tonight, including what you poured on my head, gets documented in full detail. Picked up my napkin. I set it down. I said, I want you to think carefully. Take all the time you need. The room was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Raymond looked at Carla. Carla looked at her lap. Raymond looked at Clark. Clark was staring at the table. Raymond looked at Gerald. Gerald shook his head slowly. Just barely. Tiny movement. Don't, it said. Raymond looked at me. He said, Mom, I'm sorry. I said, I know you are. Raymond said, I don't know how this got so far. Said, I do. Shall I tell you? He shook his head. Well. Said, all right. Then let me ask you something. Raymond, when did you start seeing this house as money? He didn't answer right away. He looked at the oak table, the one Harold and I drove 2 hours to collect. He looked at the photographs on the sideboard. The one of me and Harold at our 40th anniversary. The one of Raymond and Gerald as boys, sitting on the front porch steps in their pajamas. He looked at the vase of pink roses Carla had placed at the center of the table. And then very quietly he said, after Dad died, everything started looking like it needed to be resolved. Settled. Sorted. I said, your father's death was not a business problem to be managed. Raymond nodded. He looked ashamed. Genuinely ashamed, which was the first genuine thing I had seen from him all evening. Carla had said nothing for a long time. Then she said, I pushed him. I was the one who contacted Clark. I was the one who found the planning documents. I thought it was the practical thing to do. I said, Carla, practical for whom? She didn't answer. I said, I raised Raymond, to be honest. I do not know what happened between that and here, but I know that neither of you looked me in the eye during any of this. You planned around me, over me, instead of coming to me and saying, Mom, we are worried about the future. Because if you had come to me and said that, I would have sat down with you and William Pratt. And we would have talked about it together. Like a family. Like people who love each other. Instead, you did this. She had no answer for that. Neither did he. Gerald cleared his throat. He said, Mom, I didn't know any of this was happening. I want you to know that. I said, I know, Gerald. I know you didn't. He said, if I had known. I said, but you didn't. And that is fine. You are not responsible for what Raymond chose to do. Gerald nodded. Patricia took his hand. Lily leaned against my shoulder. She was still holding my hand. I squeezed it once. The birthday banner still hung on the wall. Happy birthday, Mom, in gold letters. The roses were still beautiful in the center of the table. The evening had not gone the way Carla had planned it, and had not gone the way Raymond had planned it either. It had gone exactly the way I had been prepared for it to go. I said, Raymond, I need an answer. He said, option 1. Whatever you need me to sign, I'll sign it. And Clark, Raymond looked across at him, whatever we had going, it's done. Clark nodded. He looked relieved and also very tired. Nora, his wife, looked at him for a long time without saying anything. Said, good. I said, you will both hear from William Pratt by Monday. Raymond nodded. Carla nodded. I stood up and I said, now. It is my birthday. And there is still cake on that counter. And I would very much like the rest of this evening to be pleasant. If that is not possible for some of you, I understand completely. I will be having another slice, and I invite anyone who would like to join me to do so. Miss Dorothy was on her feet immediately. You know I'm having another piece, Cecilia. Lily stood up too. So my grandma. Gerald pulled his chair over next to mine. Roberta went to the kitchen and came back with a cake and a stack of plates. Even Frank, who had barely spoken all evening, accepted a slice with a quiet thank you. Raymond and Carla did not leave. They stayed. Raymond sat at the table with his hands folded and a slice of cake in front of him that he did not eat for a long time. But he stayed. And eventually, around 9:30, he did eat it. Clark and Nora left shortly after. Clark shook my hand at the door. He looked different from when he arrived. Muller. Nora thanked me for dinner without explaining why. After they left, Roberta cornered me near the kitchen doorway and said, Cece, when did you plan all of this? I said April when Raymond asked about the deed. She shook her head slowly. She said, you sat on this for 6 months. I said I wanted to understand all of it before I addressed any of it. She said, how are you this calm? I said, Roberta, I've been calm my whole life. People just mistake it for being soft. She laughed. Big, full laugh. She hugged me tight. Frank patted my shoulder as he passed and said, Happy birthday, Cece. You are something else entirely. Harold used to say that too. The house emptied slowly. Miss Dorothy stayed until nearly 11, which was late for her. She helped me wrap the leftover cake and wash the good dishes. She said, I always knew Raymond had Harold's eyes but not his character. I said, he has more of Harold in him than he's shown tonight. People do things when they're afraid. She said, what was he afraid of? I said that time was running out. That there was money to be settled and none of it was going to be for him. She said, but it wasn't his. Said no. Never was. She kissed my cheek at the door and went home. Gerald and Patricia and Lily stayed until nearly midnight. Gerald helped me put the extra chairs back in the garage. Patricia took the floral arrangement into the living room and set it on the side table where Harold's photograph sat. She said she thought the roses looked nice there. She was right. Lily fell asleep on the couch and Gerald carried her to the car. He stood at the door for a moment before leaving and said, Mom, I'm sorry I didn't know what Raymond was doing. I should have been paying more attention. I said, Gerald, you have your own life. You have Patricia and Lily and your work. You don't have to monitor your brother. He said still nothing. You are a good son and you have always been honest with me. That is worth more than you know. He hugged me, long and tight. He smelled like his father's aftershave, which he started wearing after Harold died, and which still catches me sometimes. I stood on the porch and watched their car pull away. Then I went back inside. The house was quiet. I walked through the dining room, still faintly smelling of wine and garlic and birthday cake. I turned off the lights one by one. Checked the locks. I filled a glass of water in the kitchen and stood at the window looking out at the backyard. Harold and I planted a pear tree back there in 1993. It is enormous now. Its branches reach almost to the fence. In the spring it blooms white, and in the summer it drops small golden pears that Lily always picks up off the ground and brings to me in her pockets. I stood there looking at that tree for a while. Then I went to bed. I lay in the quiet and I thought about the evening. Not with anger, though there was some. Not with sadness, though there was some of that too. Mostly I thought about Raymond's face when he asked, when did you start seeing this house as money? And about the fact that somewhere in the past 2 years, my son had gotten lost. Not irretrievably. Not permanently. But genuinely lost. Frightened and short-sighted and willing to do something that should have been unthinkable to him. I thought about that for a long time. Then I turned off the lamp and I slept. The following Monday, William Pratt met with Raymond and Carla at his office. Raymond signed the acknowledgement of no ownership interest. He signed the formal withdrawal from all development discussions. Carla sat beside him and said nothing. William told me later that Raymond shook his hand at the door and said, Tell her I'm sorry. William said he would. By the following Friday, Clark Dunning's firm had formally withdrawn the development application from the city. The planning board sent me a confirmation letter that I read twice and then put carefully in the fireproof box in the bedroom closet. I did not hear from Raymond directly for 3 weeks. I was not surprised. I was not especially hurt. I had known this was coming. When you catch someone doing something they know was wrong, there is always a period where they need to be somewhere quiet with that knowledge. I let him have that time. I tended my roses. I had Miss Dorothy over for tea twice. I baked a batch of Harold's favorite shortbread and sent half of it with Gerald for Raymond and Carla, which I told Gerald was just because I had made too much. Gerald told me later that when Carla opened the tin she cried. I did not ask for details. 3 weeks after the birthday dinner, Raymond called. He called on a Sunday morning at 9:15. He said, "Mom." I said, "Raymond." He said, "I've been thinking a lot." Said, "I know." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I can't explain what I was thinking. I mean, I can explain it, but it doesn't come out right." Said, "Try." He said, "After Dad died, I got scared. I looked at everything around me, the house, the business stuff, the money, and I thought, this is all going to disappear. Nothing is going to hold together. And then I thought, if I could just get ahead of it, organize it, take charge of it, maybe I could make sure nothing got lost." I said, "Raymond, the house was never going to disappear. It is mine. It will remain mine for as long as I am living in it. And after that, it will go to you and Gerald together. Has always been that way." He said, "I didn't know that." I said, "You never asked." Another silence. Then he said, "I should have asked." Said, "Yes, you should have." He said, "I'm ashamed, Mom." Said, "Good." I said it gently, but I said it. Because shame means you understand what you did. It means you're not just sorry you got caught. You're sorry you did it at all. He said, "Yes." I said, "Then hold on to that. Let it teach you something." He said, "What did you do with the documents? The ones in the lockbox?" I said, "William has them." He said, "What will happen to them?" Said, "Nothing. As long as you do what you agreed to do." He breathed out slowly. He said, "Okay." I said, "Raymond, one more thing. The wine." He was quiet. I said, "I am not going to carry that. I am too old and too tired to carry the sight of my son pouring wine on his mother's head at her birthday dinner. But I need you to know that what you did in that moment was not just cruel. It told me who you had become in those 2 years since your father died. And that is the thing I want you to think about. Not the property. Not the legal documents. The man you were at that table. Is that who you want to be?" He was crying. Could hear it. He said, "No." I said, "Then become someone different. That is always possible. It is never too late to become someone different." He said, "I love you, Mom." I said, "I love you too, Raymond. I have loved you every single day of your life, and I will love you every single day until I am done. But love and trust are two separate things, and trust is going to take time." He said, "I know." I said, "Call me next Sunday. We can talk." He said, "Okay." He did call the following Sunday. And the Sunday after that. We talked about small things mostly. Harold's tools in the garage that Raymond had been wanting to ask about for 2 years. The pear tree and whether it needed trimming. A book I was reading that I thought he might like. Slowly, carefully, in small pieces, like picking up something broken and checking each piece before you decide what can still be put back together. Carla did not call for another 2 months. When she finally did, she said, "Cecilia, I would like to come and talk to you." Said, "All right." When? She came on a Tuesday afternoon. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands around a mug of tea and she said, "I owe you an apology." I said, "I'm listening." She said, "I convinced Raymond that what we were doing was practical and fair. I told myself it was the right thing. Told myself. You were old and alone and didn't need all of this, and that the practical thing was to liquidate and simplify. I told myself a great many things." I said, "And now?" She said, "Now I think I told myself those things because I wanted the money." Said, "Yes, think so too." She said, "That is an awful thing to admit." I said, "It is an honest thing to admit. Those are not always the same." She said, "I'm sorry, Cecilia. Not just for the dinner. For all of it. The way I talked about you when you weren't there. The way I convinced Raymond you were a problem to be managed." I looked at her for a long moment. She was 40 years old, dark-haired, well-dressed, sitting in my kitchen looking smaller than she ever had at any dinner party or holiday gathering or Sunday lunch. Said, "Carla, you are not a bad person. You made bad choices. Those are different things. But you have to understand this is my home. Harold and I built this life together in this house, and I intend to live in it for every year I have left. It is not an asset. It is not an estate to be managed. It is mine. She said, I understand that now. Said good. Then let's have our tea. We talked for almost 2 hours that afternoon. Not about any of it mostly. About her work, which she had gone back to full-time after everything. About Raymond and how he had started taking a woodworking class at the community center, which I told her made me very happy. She said, he found some of Harold's books in the garage. Old woodworking manuals. He's been reading them. I had to turn away for a moment when she said that. I looked out the window at the pear tree. And I let that settle. Then I turned back and said, tell him he can have the manuals if he wants them. She smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had seen from her in a very long time. She left at 4 o'clock. At the door she said, thank you, Cecilia. I said, you're welcome, Carla. She came back a week later with Raymond. They stood on the porch together and Raymond brought me a pot of lavender from the garden center. He said, I know you like lavender. He remembered that from 10 years ago when I told him I wanted to plant some along the front walk and never got around to it. I said, help me plant it. And we did. The three of us, Raymond, Carla, and I, spent an hour that Saturday morning planting lavender along the front walk of 4 Birchwood Lane. Harold would have supervised from the porch with his coffee. It was not the same as if he had been there. Nothing is. But it was something. Something real. The lavender bloomed the following spring, purple and strong, exactly where I had always imagined it. There is a thing that happens when you have lived long enough and been through enough. You stop being surprised by what people will do when they are scared. You also stop being destroyed by it. You learn to prepare. You learn to hold your knowledge close and your actions ready. And you learn to wait for the right moment because the right moment always comes if you are patient enough to wait for it. I have been patient my whole life. People called it quiet. People called it soft. My mother called it iron wrapped in cotton. Harold called it my secret weapon. The night of my 72nd birthday, my son found out exactly what it meant. 3 months after the birthday dinner, I met with William Pratt for what he called a routine check-in. He went through everything. The deed, the accounts, the licensing revenue, the formal withdrawal documents signed by Raymond. He said everything was in order. He said, Cecilia, I have been a lawyer for 31 years and I have worked with a great many clients. And I want to tell you that the way you handled all of this was one of the most thorough and composed things I have ever seen. I said I had a good teacher. He asked who. I said my husband taught me to read every document. My mother taught me to wait before I acted. And 39 years of running a home and a business taught me that information is the most powerful thing you can hold. He said, well, all 3 of them served you well. I drove home from William's office on a bright November afternoon. The trees along the road had turned gold and orange, and the air had that particular sharpness that means winter is coming. I stopped at the market and bought a chicken and some good bread and a small bunch of the late-season roses they still had in the front display. When I got home I put the roses in a vase on the kitchen table, next to Harold's photograph, which I keep there now rather than in the living room because the kitchen is where I spend most of my time. I cooked the chicken. I set the table for one. I poured myself a glass of the white wine I keep in the refrigerator for when Gerald and Patricia visit, and I sat down to eat. The house was warm and quiet and entirely mine. Outside, the pear tree had dropped its last few leaves and stood bare against the gray sky, its branches reaching out in every direction, completely untroubled by the cold. I finished my dinner and washed my dishes and then I went to the front window and looked out at the street. The lavender along the front walk had gone dormant for the winter. In a few months it would come back. It always does. I thought about what I wanted the next year to look like. More time with Lily. I had promised to teach her how to make Harold's shortbread recipe, and we hadn't done that yet. More work in the garden. The rose beds needed some new soil in the spring. Trip, perhaps. I had always wanted to see the coast of Maine in the summer. Harold and I talked about it for years and never went. There was no reason. Could not go now. I am 72 years old. I am in good health. I own my home free and clear, with no complications and no one's signature required but my own. I can go to Maine if I want. I can do anything I want. That is the thing no one tells you about being underestimated your whole life. When you finally show what you have been holding, the relief of it is extraordinary. Not because you defeated anyone. Not because you were proven right. But because you no longer have to carry the weight of being seen as less than you are. I had been carrying that weight for 72 years. On my birthday I set it down. I turned off the light in the front window and went to make myself a cup of tea. The kitchen smelled of roast chicken and roses. Harold's photograph smiled from the table. Outside the street was quiet. For Birchwood Lane was exactly as it had always been. It would stay that way. I went to bed at 9:30, which is later than usual for me, and I slept very well. Now I want to tell you about the other things that happened in the months after my birthday dinner, because not everything was difficult and not everything was sad and not everything was about Raymond. Some of it was about me, just me, and the small, steady life I continued to build for myself inside the walls of the house I love. In December, 6 weeks after the birthday dinner, I signed up for a class at the community center. A watercolor painting class, which I had wanted to try for years and kept putting off. Harold always said I had a good eye. I never tested it. The class met on Tuesday evenings from 6 to 8 and there were 9 other students, ranging in age from 26 to 81. The teacher was a young woman named Anna who had bright red hair and very paint-stained hands and an infectious enthusiasm for the way light falls on ordinary things. The first evening she put a simple white cup on the table and said, "I want you to paint what you see, not what you think you see." Painted the cup. It was not very good. But something about the act of it, the looking and the mixing and the slow careful translation of one thing into another, felt like exactly what I needed. By February I was painting the pear tree from the kitchen window. By March I was painting the lavender in a small study I had made from a photograph taken during the summer blooming. Anna said, "Cecilia, you have been holding back on us." I said, "I've been holding back on everyone." She laughed. I was the oldest student in the class and also, after the first few weeks, one of the most consistent. I never missed a Tuesday. I brought good shortbread for the class on Valentine's Day. I brought lavender sachets for everyone at the end of the spring session. Anna asked me to come back in the fall and I said yes. In January, Gerald and Patricia told me they were thinking about moving. Their house was 20 minutes away, and they were considering a larger place in a neighborhood closer to Lily's new school. They were worried about how I would feel. Gerald called me on a Sunday to talk about it, which told me how much he was worrying. He said, "Mom, I want to make sure you're okay with it." I said, "Gerald, you don't need my permission to move." He said, "I know, but I want you to be okay." I said, "I am perfectly okay. Should move wherever makes your life better." He said, "We were also thinking there's actually a house available 2 streets over from you. On Maple Court. It's a bit bigger and Lily could walk to her new school from there." I said, "Gerald." I said it the way I say things when I am very pleased but do not want to show too much of it at once. He said, "I know it's close." I said, "I think it's a wonderful idea." They moved in March. On the first Sunday after they moved in, Patricia brought Lily over in the morning and we made Harold's shortbread together, the 3 of us in the kitchen, with flour on our hands and the radio on. Lily has Harold's hands. Long fingers, precise. She took the recipe home to keep. Miss Dorothy nearly cried when I told her Gerald and his family had moved 2 streets over. She said, "This neighborhood is going to be all right after." In the spring I went to Maine. 2 weeks in July. I rented a small cottage near the water in a town called Rockport, which has a working harbor and enormous lobster rolls and mornings so beautiful they hurt. I drove myself. 26 hours over 2 days with an overnight stop in Connecticut at a quiet bed and breakfast where the owner made her own jam. I took my watercolor supplies. I painted the harbor. I painted the lighthouse. I painted the view from the cottage porch at 6 in the morning, when the fog was still sitting on the water and everything was silver and still. On the 4th day I drove to a bookshop in town and spent 3 hours in it. I bought 6 books. On the last evening before I left, I sat on the porch and I thought about Harold. I told him about the harbor and the lobster and the fog. I told him about Anna's painting class and the lavender along the front walk and Lily making shortbread. I told him Raymond was taking a woodworking class and reading his old manuals. I told him Gerald and Patricia were 2 streets away now. I told him I was all right. More than all right. I said you were right about all of it. He had told me once, near the end when he was sick and we both knew it, he said, "Cece, you are the most capable person I have ever known." I did not believe him at the time. Believe him now. I drove home from Maine on a Monday in late July. The house smelled of warm wood and summer heat, the way it always does when I have been away. I opened the windows. I brought in the mail. I put the painting of the harbor on the wall in the hallway. Then I made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table and looked at Harold's photograph, and said I'm back, and felt completely, thoroughly, entirely at home. Raymond came to Sunday coffee through the spring and into the summer. Some Sundays were easier than others. There were weeks when conversation flowed and we talked about woodworking and the neighborhood and Lily's school, and it felt almost like it used to. And there were weeks that were quieter, more careful, like walking on a path where you are still learning where the ground is solid. I did not rush it. Trust is not rebuilt in a Sunday or a spring. It is rebuilt in small choices made consistently over time. Raymond was making those choices. Slowly. But he was making them. Carla came with him most Sundays by June. She and I found our footing in small talk and tea and the shared work of loading the dishwasher after coffee. She started bringing flowers sometimes. Not roses. Different flowers each time. Sunflowers, zinnias, a bunch of bright orange marigolds once. I always put them in the blue vase Harold and I bought in Portugal on our 25th anniversary. She seemed to like that I did. In August, Raymond finished the first thing he made in his woodworking class. A small box, about the size of a shoebox, made of cherry wood with a simple dovetail joint and a fitted lid. He brought it over one Sunday and set it on the kitchen table without saying anything. Picked it up. It was smooth and solid and fitted together very precisely. Harold would have approved of those joints. I said, "Raymond, this is beautiful." He said, "I wanted you to have it." I turned it over in my hands. I said, "What made you choose cherry?" He said, "It was Dad's favorite." Said it was. He nodded. I set the box carefully on the shelf in the hallway, next to the photograph of me and Harold at our 40th anniversary. That is where it still sits. On a Tuesday evening in September, near the end of my second watercolor session, Anna asked if any of the students would like to put their work in a small group show she was organizing at the community center gallery. Nothing formal. Just a few pieces each. Chance to share the work. I said yes without thinking about it too much, which is sometimes the best way to say yes to things. Chose 4 paintings. The cup from the first lesson because it reminded me of beginnings. The pear tree in winter. The Rockport harbor in the morning fog. And the lavender along the front walk in full summer bloom, purple and reaching, every plant exactly where it was supposed to be. The show opened on a Saturday in October. Gerald and Patricia brought Lily, who stood in front of the lavender painting for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "Grandma, this is really good." Said, "Thank you, Lily." She said, "Can I have it when you're done with the show?" Said, "Yes, you can." Miss Dorothy came. She brought Frank, Roberta's husband. Roberta came. Raymond and Carla came. They stood together in front of the painting of the pear tree and I watched Raymond look at it for a while. He said, "I can see the kitchen window in it." I said, "That's where I painted it from." He said, "I used to watch you stand at that window when I was little. I didn't know what you were thinking about." I said, "I was usually thinking about what needed to be done." He said, "That sounds about right." We stood there for a moment, the two of us looking at the painting. Then he said, "I'm glad you're still here, Mom." Said, "So am I." I want to tell you where things stand, 1 year after the birthday dinner that changed everything and nothing depending on how you look at it. The house at 4 Birchwood Lane is mine. It was mine before that night, and it is mine now, and it will remain mine for as long as I am living and breathing and wanting to be here. The deed is filed, the accounts are current, the taxes are paid. And William Pratt has his copy of everything in case anyone ever gets confused about that again. I do not expect they will. The licensing revenue from Whitmore Craft Supplies arrived in my account again last quarter, exactly as it has every quarter for 11 years. I bought new soil for the rose beds with part of it. The rest went into savings. Raymond and Carla are still paying Clark Dunning's firm back for the preliminary consulting work they commissioned on the development proposal. It is not a large sum, but it is a consequence, and living with consequences is part of how you learn. Clark Dunning's real estate license came under review by the state board. He did not lose it, but the review happened, and reviews leave marks. He has not contacted me. I have not contacted him. Nora, his wife, sent me a card at Christmas. Just a card with a simple note. Said, "I'm sorry for everything. I wish you well." I sent one back. That is probably all that will ever pass between us, and that is fine. Gerald and Patricia and Lily are 2 streets away. We have Sunday lunch together most weeks. Patricia has started bringing a salad. Lily has started bringing her homework. I have started keeping a stock of apple juice because Lily decided she likes apple juice. In the spring I am going to teach her to plant roses. She already has an opinion about which color she wants, which tells me she will be very good at it. My watercolor class starts again in 2 weeks. Anna has said she wants to try working with oils this session, which intimidates me slightly and also excites me, which is exactly the right combination for trying something new. I am planning another trip. Not Maine this time, though I would go back to Maine happily. This time I am thinking about the coast of Oregon, which I have never seen and which several people have told me is unlike anything else. I will drive. I will take my paints. I will stop at bookshops. Miss Dorothy has asked if she can come. Said yes, before she even finished asking. We are planning it for next July, which gives us plenty of time to decide everything and also to be excited about it for a full year in advance, which is its own kind of pleasure. Raymond is making a chair now. In his woodworking class. A proper chair with a curved back and tapered legs. He showed me a photograph on his phone last Sunday. He said it would take him another 2 months to finish. He said, "I was thinking if it turns out well, maybe I could make one for your garden." I said I would like that very much. He smiled. Not the practiced, careful smile from the birthday dinner. His real smile, the one he got from Harold. The one that starts in his eyes before it gets to his mouth. I made a note in my mind of it. Some things you want to keep. Carla brought sunflowers last Sunday. She also brought a cheese she had found at a new shop downtown. A good soft cheese with herbs. She said, "I thought you might like to try it." I did. We ate it with crackers at the kitchen table and talked about nothing important for an hour. At the end, when she was putting on her coat, she said, "I like coming here." I said, "I like having you here." He paused at the door. She said, "It wasn't always true that I liked it." Said, "I know." She said, "I'm glad it changed." Said, "So am I." After they left, I stood in the kitchen for a while. The afternoon light came through the west window at the angle it gets in October, low and golden, the kind of light that makes everything look like a painting. I thought about Harold, the way I often do in late afternoon. I thought about the 43 years we spent in his house, the children growing up in it. The dinners and the arguments and the ordinary Tuesdays and the times we laughed until we couldn't breathe. I thought about the birthday dinner and the wine in my hair and the key on the table in 60 seconds, and how a whole life's worth of patience and preparation had come down to that single quiet moment. And I thought about what I said to Raymond on the phone, that it is never too late to become someone different. Believe that. I have seen it happen. I am still seeing it happen. It is slow and it is not complete and it may never be entirely complete, and that is the nature of things that were genuinely broken. But it is happening. And that is enough. I picked up Harold's photograph from the table and I looked at him, my husband of 43 years who called me his secret weapon and meant it and was right about it. I said, "We're okay, Harold. All of us. A little different than we were. But okay." I put the photograph back down. I poured myself a glass of the good white wine and I went out to the back porch and I sat in the evening air and I looked at the pear tree. The leaves had turned yellow and were beginning to let go, drifting down one at a time in the October breeze. By next week the tree would be bare. By April it would bloom again. White blossoms all the way to the fence line. Golden pears in July. Lily picking them up off the ground and bringing them to me in her pockets. I am 72 years old. I have a house I have lived in for 39 years, a garden I know by heart, a son who is learning to be honest again, a grandchild who has Harold's hands and my stubbornness, a watercolor class on Tuesday evenings, a trip to Oregon planned for July, and a neighbor who will travel the coast with me and make me laugh the entire way there. I have what I built, and I have what I kept, and I have what I refused to let go of when someone decided it was theirs to take. I set my wine glass down on the arm of the porch chair. The air smelled of fallen leaves and coming cold. From the front of the house I could hear the neighborhood settling into evening. Somewhere 2 streets over, in Gerald and Patricia's kitchen, Lily was probably doing her homework at the table where I would have lunch with them on Sunday. The lavender along the front walk had gone to sleep for the winter. It would wake up again in the spring. It always does. It always does. I want to tell you something now that we are near the end of this story. I want to tell you what I learned from the night my son poured wine on my head and told me to leave my own house. I learned that being underestimated is only a disadvantage if you forget what you are actually worth. I spent a great deal of my life being called quiet, soft, a housewife, someone who simply married well and stood in a man's shadow and benefited from his work. I was never any of those things. I managed the money and read the contracts and negotiated the terms and raised the children and kept the house and built the business alongside Harold for 40 years. And I did it without requiring anyone to notice or acknowledge it, because I did not do it for acknowledgement. I did it because it needed doing and I was capable of doing it. The people who called me soft never saw what I was doing. They saw the quiet. They did not see what the quiet contained. On my 72nd birthday, my son found out. I also learned that preparation is not paranoia. When Raymond asked about the deed in April, some people might have thought, he is just curious. I am sure it is nothing. I should not assume the worst about my own child. I did not assume the worst. I simply asked what was true, and the answer to what was true required me to prepare. Preparation is not a weapon. It is not an attack. It is just readiness. And readiness is what allowed me to sit at that table with wine dripping off my hair and still hold every card I needed to hold. I learned that love and tolerance are not the same thing. I love Raymond. I have always loved Raymond. That love did not require me to allow him to steal from me. It did not require me to look away from what he was doing. It did not require me to forgive before he had understood what he had done or before he had taken any steps to correct it. True love, the kind that actually helps people, sometimes means saying, you did something very wrong and here is the weight of it, and you will carry it until you have earned the right to put it down. That is harder than forgiving instantly. It is also more honest. I also learned that houses hold memory. Every room of 4, Birchwood Lane, holds something of Harold in it. The marks on the doorframe where we measured the boys as they grew. The corner of the living room ceiling he patched twice and never quite got smooth. The workshop in the garage with his tools still hanging in their places. When I walk through this house, I am never entirely alone. When someone tried to take this house, they were trying to take all of that. And I think that is partly why I was as prepared as I was. Because I was not only protecting property, I was protecting memory. And you do not let go of memory easily. You just don't. I want to tell you about one more thing before I go. On Harold's birthday in February, I did what I do every year. I made his favorite dinner, roast chicken with potatoes and a proper gravy. And I set the table for 2 and I lit candles, and I sat down and I ate and I talked to him the way I always do on his birthday. I told him about the watercolor class in Maine and Oregon, and the lavender and Raymond's cherry wood box and Lily's hands and the shortbread and the Sunday coffee conversations that were slowly becoming real again. And then I told him about the birthday dinner. All of it. The planning, the documents, the wine, the key, the 60 seconds. The way Raymond's face looked when he saw what I had prepared. I told him all of it without leaving anything out. When I was done, I was quiet for a while. Then I said, I handled it, Harold. I said, the way you always knew I could. The candles burned down while I sat there. The gravy went cold. The house was completely quiet. And in the quiet I could feel him very clearly. The same way I have been able to feel him since he died, not as a ghost or memory but as a permanent part of the structure of my life, like the walls of this house, always there, always solid, always holding. I picked up my wine glass, the good white wine, the one I keep for when Gerald and Patricia visit. I raised it slightly. Said, Happy birthday, my love. The candle flame moved slightly, just once, in a room with no draft and no open window. I know what it was. It was just a candle doing what candles do. But I chose to take it as an answer, and I was very glad I did. I cleared the table. I put the leftovers in the refrigerator. I washed the good dishes by hand, the ones we got as a wedding gift and that I will not put in the dishwasher under any circumstances. I dried them and put them back in the cabinet. I turned off the kitchen light and stood for a moment in the doorway looking at the table where I had just eaten dinner with the memory of my husband on his birthday in the house where we had spent 43 years of everything together. Then I said good night, Harold. And I went to bed. And I slept very well. There is one last thing I want you to understand. Not about Raymond or Carla or Clark Dunning or William Pratt or any of the legal documents or the 60 seconds or the key or the wine in my hair. I want you to understand it about yourself, whoever you are watching this. Wherever you are sitting right now, whatever is happening in your own life. Here it is. The thing that saved me was not the documents. It was not the attorney or the bank records or the 3 phone calls I made in April. Those were all just tools. They were all just the visible surface of something that goes much deeper. What saved me was 39 years of paying attention. Paying attention to what I owned and what I built and what I was worth and what the people around me were doing and not doing and saying and not saying. Paying attention is not glamorous. No one gives you credit for it. No one looks at a woman who reads every document and keeps good records and listens carefully and says, "That is a powerful woman." They look at her and say, "There is a quiet woman. She is fine. She is soft. She is no threat." That is exactly what I wanted them to say. Because paying attention for 39 years means that when the moment comes, you are ready. And the moment always comes. For me it came on my birthday with wine in my hair and a key in my pocket. For you it will come differently. But it will come. And when it does, I want you to be ready. Keep your records. Know what you own. Read the documents. Ask the questions. Trust the people who have earned trust and not the ones who have only said the right words. Know what you are worth and do not let anyone offer you a lower price. I am 72 years old. My name is Cecilia Grace Whitmore. I have lived in the house at 4 Birchwood Lane for 39 years and I intend to live in it for 39 more if I have anything to say about it. My son tried to take my home on my birthday. He did not succeed. My roses are blooming. My lavender came back stronger this spring than it was last year. Lily is coming for lunch on Sunday and she is bringing her homework, and I am making Harold's shortbread and Gerald is bringing a good loaf of bread from the bakery on Maple Court. Raymond is coming too. He is bringing Carla and the cherrywood box he made me and very possibly a new cheese because Carla has become interested in cheese, which is one of the more pleasant surprises of recent months. Miss Dorothy will be over for dinner on Thursday. We have started watching a mystery program together on Thursday evenings, which we both deny taking too seriously and both absolutely take too seriously. Oregon is 4 months away. My paint supplies are ready. I've decided on 2 new brushes. The pear tree is going to be spectacular this summer. I can feel it already. In the spring I will plant new soil in the rose beds. In the summer I will drive to Oregon and paint the coast and eat seafood and stay in small hotels and read in the evenings and call Lily every other day. In the autumn I will start my 3rd watercolor session with Anna, and I have already decided I am not going to be intimidated by oil paint. I am going to learn it the same way I learned everything else, steadily and carefully and without letting anyone see me figure it out until it is already figured out. And in the winter I will sit on my porch in the cold clear air with a blanket on my lap and a cup of something hot in my hand and look at the bare branches of the pear tree against the winter sky and think about everything I have, which is more than I ever needed and exactly as much as I built. Some people look at an old woman living alone in a house and they see a problem to be solved, a resource to be managed, a soft thing that can be moved. They see the quiet and they forget what quiet holds. I want to remind them, the quiet holds everything. It holds 39 years of attention and preparation and love and stubbornness and knowledge and Harold's voice in every room and the pear tree blooming in April and lavender along the front walk and a grandchild with long careful hands who is learning to bake and will someday plant her own roses in her own garden. It holds everything worth holding. And it is entirely, completely, permanently mine. I picked up my coffee this morning and I sat on the back porch and I watched the sun come up over the pear tree. And the light came through the branches in long gold lines, and the birds started up, one at a time, and the neighborhood began its slow waking. It was a perfectly ordinary morning. It was the most ordinary morning I have had in a long time, and I was grateful for every single second of it. 'Cause ordinary means safe. Ordinary means mine. Ordinary means I won. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Not in a way that anyone passing would have noticed or cared about. But I won in the only way that matters. I am still here. The house is still mine. The roses are coming back. Lily is coming for lunch. Harold is in every room. And my coffee, as always, is exactly the right temperature because I have been making it for 43 years and I have had a great deal of practice. This is the thing about living a long time and paying attention and building carefully and waiting for the right moment. You don't just survive the thing that was meant to end you. You walk out the other side of it and you make your coffee and you sit on your porch and you watch the sun come through the branches of the tree you planted 30 years ago and you think, all right, that happened. And now I am still here and the morning is very beautiful and there is a good deal more living still to be done. And then you do it. You just do. On the night of my 72nd birthday, my son stood at the table and drenched me in wine. He told me I had until sunrise to get out. Every person at that table waited to see what I would do. I reached into my pocket and I pulled out a key and I set it on the table and I said, "Then you have 60 seconds. And I meant every word of it. That key did not open the lockbox at First National Bank. I told Raymond it did. And he believed me because guilt makes people believe things that fear alone might have questioned. The key was the key to Harold's old workshop in the garage. It had been in my cardigan pocket for 3 days. Ever since I had been out there looking for his woodworking manuals to set aside for Raymond, thinking he might want them someday. Carried it in. And forgot to put it back. And when I needed something to hold up and say, here is the truth of what I have, this house, this workshop, these 43 years of building. When I needed something solid to put on the table between myself and my son's worst impulse, I reached into my pocket and there it was. The actual documents, the real ones, were safe with William Pratt. But the key was what Raymond saw. And what Raymond saw was a woman who was ready. Who had always been ready. Who would always be ready. He was not wrong about that. I was ready. I had been ready for a long time. The morning light on the pear tree is gold. Coffee is hot. Lily is coming for lunch. Harold is in every room of this house and he always will be. My name is Cecilia Grace Whitmore and I am 72 years old and this is my home. And I am not going anywhere. If you have a person in your life who is being treated as if they are small, if you know someone who is being seen as soft when they are not, if you are that person, I want you to remember this morning. I want you to remember that the quiet holds everything. I want you to remember that being underestimated is only a disadvantage if you accept it as the truth of what you are. It is not. You know what you are. You know what you have built and what you hold and what you are worth. Don't let anyone offer you a lower price. Not on your birthday. Not on any day. If they try, reach into your pocket and find what's there. Might be a key. Might be something else entirely. But I promise you, if you have been paying attention, if you have been building quietly and carefully for as long as you have been building, there is something there. There is always something there. Just wait for the right moment. It will come. And then, very quietly, set it on the table. You have been so kind to sit with this story all the way to the end. I am Cecilia Grace Whitmore of 4 Birchwood Lane. And I want to remind you that whatever you are facing right now, whatever feels too big or too difficult or too far gone to come back from, there is a way through it that looks like patience and preparation and the willingness to wait until you know the whole truth before you act. That is not weakness. That is power. Real power. The kind that lasts. Take care of yourself. Take care of the people you love. And if you are ever sitting at a birthday dinner and someone tries to pour wine on your head, reach into your pocket first. You never know what you might find there. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe to Granny's Voice and leave a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me if there is someone in your life who reminded you of Cecilia or Harold or even Raymond. Someone who made a mistake and is finding their way back. I read every comment. Every single one. This channel is built on stories like this one. Stories about people who were counted out and refused to stay down. And I am so grateful to share them with you. Click the bell so you never miss a new story. And until next time, remember what Cecilia said. The quiet holds everything.